deep beneath the roots of the great oak tree, where moonbeams never touched and the earth held ancient secrets, something extraordinary was about to happen. But first, you must know about Dozy. Dozy wasn't like the other ants in Busy Hill Colony. While his sisters and brothers marched in perfect lines, carrying crumbs 3 times their size and singing work songs that echoed through the tunnels, Dozy would pause mid-step, yawn enormously, and dream of fluffy clouds shaped like cheese. Wheels? His antennae would droop, his 6 little legs would wobble, and before anyone could say "sugar cube," he'd be fast asleep, sometimes right in the middle of the busiest tunnel in the colony. "Dozy," Queen Antonia would call in her royal voice. That sounded like tinkling silver bells. The winter preparations won't complete themselves, but Dozy, curled up like a tiny black marble, would only mumble, "Just 5 more minutes, Your Majesty," and continue dreaming of dancing dandelions and swimming in puddles of honey. The other ants didn't understand. How could anyone prefer sleeping to the thrilling adventure of gathering food? How could anyone choose dreams over the satisfying work of building tunnels and organizing the pantry? They'd shake their heads and whisper, "That Dozy will never amount to anything. He's too lazy, too sleepy, too different." But tonight, this very special night, when the harvest moon hung like a giant golden coin in the star-scattered sky, everything was about to change. The first snowflake of winter had just kissed the ground when Dozy made the biggest mistake of his tiny life. It was the evening of the great harvest festival, when all the ants celebrated their successful preparation for the cold months ahead. The colony buzzed with excitement as they displayed mountains of seeds, rivers of honey, and towers of breadcrumbs that reached almost to the tunnel ceiling. "Look at what we've accomplished together," announced Queen Antonia, her crown of dewdrops sparkling in the lantern light. "Thanks to everyone's hard work, we'll feast like royalty all winter long." The colony erupted in cheers and applause. Tiny ant musicians played leaf trumpets and acorn drums while others performed elaborate dances. The celebration was so magnificent that even the earthworms poked their heads up to watch. But where was Dozy? You guessed right. He was yawning. Standing at the back of the great hall, Dozy felt his eyelids growing heavy as honey. The warm, cozy atmosphere, the gentle humming of happy ants, and the soft glow of the lanterns created the perfect sleeping conditions. His head began to nod, his knees began to buckle, and despite his best efforts to stay awake for this important celebration, sleep wrapped around him like a warm blanket. "I'll just rest my eyes for a moment," he whispered to himself, settling into a comfortable corner behind a large mushroom. "Just until the dancing is over." But this wasn't just any ordinary sleep. This was the kind of deep magical slumber that sometimes happens to very tired little creatures who have been fighting sleep for far too long. It was the sleep of legends, the sleep of fairy tales, the kind that lasts much, much longer than anyone expects. As Dozy drifted into dreamland, the celebration continued around him. Hours passed. The dancing ended, the music faded, and one by one, the ants returned to their cozy chambers for the night. The lanterns were extinguished, the great hall grew quiet, and still Dozy slept on, invisible in his mushroom hiding spot. Days passed, then weeks. The first snow became a thick white blanket that covered Busy Hill Colony like frosting on a cake. The entrances were sealed for warmth. The tunnels grew quiet except for the soft padding of feet during daily activities, and life settled into the peaceful rhythm of winter. And still Dozy slept. When Dozy finally opened his eyes, the world had changed completely. The first thing he noticed was the cold. Not the gentle cool of autumn evenings, but a deep, bone-chilling cold that made his antennae shiver and his breath come out in tiny puffs of mist. The second thing he noticed was the silence. busy hill colony was never silent. There was always the sound of busy feet, cheerful chatter, or work songs echoing through the tunnels. But now, as Dozy rubbed his sleepy eyes and stretched his cramped legs, he heard nothing but the whisper of wind through empty passages. "Hello?" he called softly, his voice sounding small and uncertain in the vast emptiness. "Queen Antonia? Anyone?" His words echoed back to him, "Hello, hello, hello." Dozy's heart began to flutter like a trapped butterfly. Where was everyone? Surely they hadn't all gone to sleep this early in the evening. He looked around the great hall, expecting to see the familiar hustle and bustle of colony life, but instead found only empty tunnels and chambers that looked strangely different. The walls, once warm brown earth, were now covered with a thin layer of frost that sparkled like diamond dust. Icicles hung from the ceiling like crystal teeth. The air was so cold that each breath felt like swallowing winter itself. "This is impossible," Dozy whispered, his voice shaking. "It was just autumn. It was just the harvest festival. What happened to the warm days? What happened to everyone?" Hipoal began to explore the colony, his tiny feet making lonely sounds in the frozen tunnels. Every chamber he visited was the same, empty, cold, and covered with the beautiful but frightening decoration of deep winter. The pantry, which had been so full during the festival, was completely bare. Not a single seed, not a drop of honey, not even a breadcrumb remained. The truth hit him like a snowball to the heart. He had slept through the entire winter preparation period, while his family and friends had been working harder than ever to gather food and prepare their home for the cold months. He had been dreaming peacefully in his corner. And now, when winter had arrived in all its harsh beauty, he was alone and helpless. But that wasn't the worst discovery. As Dozy wandered through the eerily quiet colony, his sharp ant eyes noticed something that made his stomach drop like a stone into a deep well. Throughout the tunnels, scattered like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale, were tiny personal belongings left behind by his family. Here was Aunt Busy's favorite work apron, dropped in her hurry. There was little Cousin Scurry's toy made from a bottle cap, abandoned in the middle of a tunnel. In the nursery, he found baby blankets woven from dandelion fluff, left empty and cold. The trail of belongings led him deeper into the colony than he had ever explored before, past chambers he didn't recognize, through tunnels that seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth's heart. His small lantern, one of the emergency ones kept in every chamber, cast dancing shadows on the frost-covered walls, making everything look mysterious and a little frightening. The trail led to a part of the colony that felt different from the rest. The tunnels here were older, carved by ants from generations past. Strange symbols covered the walls, ancient ant writing that told stories of long-ago winters and adventures that had become legends. And then, in the deepest, most ancient chamber of all, Dozy found them. His entire family, his friends, his neighbors, every single ant from Busy Hill Colony, lay in the deepest sleep imaginable. They were arranged in neat rows, covered with blankets of woven grass and moss, looking peaceful but frighteningly still. Queen Antonia lay at the center, her crown still sparkling, but her breathing so shallow it was barely visible. Dozy's heart hammered against his tiny chest like a woodpecker against a tree. This wasn't normal winter hibernation. This was something else entirely. Something was terribly, desperately wrong. On the wall above the sleeping ants, carved in the ancient script, were words that seemed to glow in his lantern light. Though he had never learned to read the old language, somehow, in his panic and love for his family, the meaning became clear. When the sleeper wakes alone, when winter's grip grows too strong, only the great journey can save those who slumber here. The path lies beyond the white desert, past the mountain of echoes, in the valley of the golden spring. There sleeps the ancient remedy, waiting for one brave enough to wake it. Dozy read the words again and again, hoping he had misunderstood. But the message was clear. His family was under some kind of terrible sleeping spell, and only something called the ancient remedy could wake them. And that remedy lay far, far away, across dangers he couldn't even imagine. The little ant who had spent his whole life sleeping was the only one awake to save everyone he loved. Dozy stared at his sleeping family for what felt like hours, his mind racing faster than it ever had before. How could he, the laziest ant in the colony, possibly make such a dangerous journey? He had never even left the immediate area around the great oak tree. He didn't know how to navigate by the stars or read the signs of weather. He had always depended on others to take care of him. But as he looked at Queen Antonia's peaceful face, at Aunt Busy's still form, at little cousin Scurry sleeping so deeply, something changed inside his heart. It wasn't a loud change. It was quiet and steady, like the first ray of sunrise creeping over the horizon. For the first time in his life, Dozy felt the powerful force of love that was stronger than his tiredness, stronger than his fear, stronger than his doubt. "I'll save you," he whispered to his sleeping family. "I promise I'll bring back the ancient remedy, no matter what it takes." But first, he needed supplies. In the frozen pantry, he managed to find a few seeds that had rolled into a crack in the wall, just enough for a tiny emergency meal. He wrapped himself in the warmest blanket he could find, gathered some emergency candles, and filled a small container with water from the underground spring that hadn't yet frozen solid. As he prepared to leave the only home he had ever known, Dozy paused at the entrance to the ancient chamber. His family looked so peaceful, so trusting, as if they believed someone would save them. The weight of their hope settled on his small shoulders like a great responsibility. "Sleep well," he whispered. "I'll be back with help. I promise." Manamabite. Journey to the surface was harder than Dozy had ever imagined. The tunnels that led to the outside world were partially blocked with snow and ice. He had to dig, push, and squeeze his way through passages that seemed determined to keep him underground. His tiny muscles, so used to sleeping, ached with every movement. When he finally emerged into the outside world, the sight took his breath away. Everything was white, not just white, brilliantly, blindingly, endlessly white. Snow covered the landscape like a thick blanket that erased all familiar landmarks. The great oak tree, usually so easy to recognize, was draped in ice and snow until it looked like a giant crystal sculpture. The hills, the meadows, the streams, everything Dozy had known was transformed into an alien world of winter beauty and winter danger. The cold hit him like a wall of ice water. In seconds his antennae were numb, his tiny feet were freezing, and his breath came in sharp puffs that immediately turned to frost. This was cold beyond anything he had ever experienced, cold that could freeze a little ant solid in minutes. But Dozy didn't turn back. Instead, he pulled his blanket tighter, squinted against the blowing snow, and took his first step into the white desert. Walking through the snow when you're as small as an ant is like trying to swim through an ocean of cold white quicksand. Each step required enormous effort as Dozy's tiny legs sank deep into the soft powder. Sometimes the snow was so deep that he had to tunnel through it like a miniature snow mole, creating tiny paths that collapsed behind him. The wind was his greatest enemy. It howled across the open landscape like a living thing, searching for small creatures to freeze with its icy breath. Several times, gusts picked Dozy up and tumbled him head over heels through the snow, leaving him dizzy and disoriented. He learned to watch for the signs of approaching windstorms, the way the snow swirled in the distance, the change in the sound of the air, and to quickly dig tiny shelters where he could wait out the worst weather. But the most challenging part wasn't the cold or the wind, or even the exhausting walking. It was the loneliness. Dozy had never been truly alone before. Even when he was sleeping, he had always been surrounded by the comfortable sounds of colony life, the distant chatter of workers, the gentle humming of the nursery attendants, the reassuring presence of hundreds of family members living their busy lives around him. Now, in the vast white silence of winter, there was only the sound of wind and the crunch of his own footsteps. The silence was so complete that he could hear his own heartbeat, his own breathing, even the tiny sounds his stomach made when he was hungry. To keep his spirits up, Dozy began talking to himself, and then, when that felt too strange, he began talking to his family as if they were walking beside him. "Look at that icicle, Aunt Busy," he would say to the empty air. "You'd love to add that to your winter decoration collection. Cousin Scurry, you'd probably want to slide down that snow hill like a tiny toboggan," he'd chuckle, imagining his playful little cousin's delight. "Queen Antonia, I bet you've never seen snow sparkle quite like this before," he'd whisper, marveling at the way the sunlight turned the landscape into a field of diamonds. These imaginary conversations helped, but they also made the ache in his heart grow stronger. With every step, he missed his family more intensely. He missed the warmth of sleeping surrounded by loved ones. He missed the security of knowing that someone else was taking care of the important decisions. He missed being part of something larger than himself. On the third day of his journey through the White Desert, Dozy faced his first real crisis. He woke up from a brief rest to find that his water had frozen solid during the night, and his small supply of seeds was running dangerously low. Worse, a snowstorm was approaching. He could see the dark clouds gathering on the horizon like an army of gray giants. For the first time since beginning his journey, Dozy felt despair creeping into his heart like cold water. He was just one small ant in an enormous, dangerous world. What had made him think he could succeed where stronger, smarter ants might fail? But then, just as he was about to give up hope, he saw something that changed everything. Rising from the white landscape like a sleeping giant, the mountain of echoes appeared through the swirling snow. It was enormous, so tall that its peak disappeared into the clouds, so wide that Dozy couldn't see where it ended on either side. The mountain was made of dark gray stone that contrasted dramatically with the white snow, and strange formations jutted from its sides like the work of some ancient, artistic giant. But what made this mountain truly special wasn't its size, it was the sounds that came from it. As Dozy approached, he began to hear voices carried on the wind. At first he thought other travelers were nearby, and his heart leaped with hope. But as he listened more carefully, he realized these weren't the voices of anyone present. They were echoes, sounds from long ago that the mountain had somehow captured and continued to replay like a giant stone music box. He heard the laughter of ant children from summers past, the work songs of long-dead colonies, the gentle lullabies that grandmother ants had sung to their little ones decades ago. The mountain held the memories of every sound that had ever touched its slopes, and now it shared them with anyone brave enough to listen. Among all these ancient echoes, Dozy heard something that made his tiny heart nearly stop. His own voice, and the voices of his family from the night of the Great Harvest Festival. "Look at what we've accomplished together," came Queen Antonia's voice, crystal clear despite being weeks old. "Just 5 more minutes, Your Majesty," came his own sleepy mumble in response. Hearing these familiar voices in this strange, lonely place brought tears to Dozy's eyes. But it also filled him with renewed determination. The mountain was telling him that every moment, every word, every connection between family members was precious enough to be remembered forever. His family's voices were part of this mountain's eternal song, proof that their lives and their love mattered in the great story of the world. The climb up the mountain of echoes was the hardest physical challenge Dozy had ever faced. The path was steep and slippery, covered with ice that made every step treacherous. His tiny claws had to grip the smallest cracks in the stone, and several times he slipped and had to catch himself from falling into the snowy depths below. But the mountains seemed to be helping him. Whenever he felt his strength failing, he would hear an encouraging echo, perhaps the voice of some long-ago adventurer who had faced similar challenges, or the cheering of ants who had believed in the impossible. These ghostly voices became his companions, urging him forward when his own courage wavered. "You can do it, little one," whispered the echo of some ancient grandmother ant. "Every step brings you closer," encouraged the voice of a young ant who might have made this same journey decades ago. "Your family believes in you," came the faint but clear voice of Queen Antonia herself, somehow echoing from the future with a message of faith and love. At the peak of the Mountain of Echoes, Dozy found something unexpected, a small shelter built from carefully arranged stones with a cache of emergency supplies left by previous travelers. There were a few preserved berries, some dried grass for warmth, and most importantly, a small scroll with a map drawn by those who had passed this way before. The map showed the Valley of the Golden Spring, still far away but closer than Dozy had dared to hope. According to the ancient drawings, the valley lay just beyond the mountain, hidden in a secret place where spring lived year-round, protected from winter's harsh grip. As Dozy rested in the stone shelter, surrounded by the comforting echoes of travelers who had come before him, he realized something important had happened during his climb. He was no longer the same ant who had begun this journey. His muscles were stronger, his mind was clearer, and his heart was filled with a courage he had never known he possessed. The lazy little ant who had slept through every important moment was becoming someone new, someone who could face impossible challenges because love had given him a purpose greater than his own comfort. The descent from the Mountain of Echoes was like stepping from one world into another. As Dozy carefully made his way down the far side of the great peak, the harsh white landscape began to change in ways that seemed almost magical. First, the snow became thinner, revealing patches of brown earth underneath. Then, amazingly, he began to see tiny green shoots poking through the white blanket, actual grass growing in the middle of winter. The air grew warmer with each step, and the bitter wind that had been his constant companion for days gradually faded to a gentle breeze. By the time he reached the valley floor, Dozy found himself in what could only be described as a miracle. The Valley of the Golden Spring was a hidden pocket of eternal spring, protected by the surrounding mountains from winter's harsh embrace. Flowers bloomed in abundance, daffodils and crocuses, tiny violets and early roses that filled the air with perfume. Trees wore fresh green leaves that rustled softly in the warm breeze, and somewhere in the distance, Dozy could hear the gentle sound of flowing water. But most amazing of all was the light. Everything in the valley seemed to glow with a soft golden radiance that made the colors more vivid, the air more sweet, and the whole world more beautiful than anything Dozy had ever seen. It was as if someone had captured pure happiness and used it to paint the landscape. Following the sound of water, Dozy made his way through meadows of wildflowers and groves of fruit trees until he found the source of the valley's magic, the Golden Spring itself. The spring bubbled up from a pool of crystal-clear water that reflected the sky like a perfect mirror. But this wasn't ordinary water. It sparkled and shimmered with an inner light that seemed to come from deep within the earth. Golden ripples spread across the surface with each bubble, creating patterns that were beautiful beyond description. And there, growing beside the spring on a small island in the center of the pool, was a single, extraordinary flower, the ancient remedy. The flower was unlike anything in Dozy's experience. Its petals shifted through every color of the rainbow. Now, blue like a summer sky, now purple like twilight, now silver like starlight, now gold like the sun. It seemed to pulse with life, and Dozy could swear he heard it singing, a soft, wordless melody that spoke of healing and hope and the power of love to overcome any obstacle. But as Dozy approached the edge of the spring, preparing to wade across to the flower, he discovered the final challenge of his journey. "Who disturbs the ancient remedy?" came a voice like honey mixed with thunder. Dozy spun around to find himself face to face with the largest, most magnificent butterfly he had ever seen. Her wings spanned wider than he was tall, decorated with patterns that seemed to move and shift like living kaleidoscopes. Her eyes were ancient and kind, but also sharp with the wisdom of centuries. "I am Seraphina, guardian of the golden spring," the butterfly continued, her voice both gentle and commanding. "For 1,000 years I have protected the ancient remedy from those who would use its power selfishly. Tell me, little ant, why should I allow you to take the flower that could heal any wound, cure any illness, wake any sleeper?" Dozy's first instinct was to feel afraid. This magnificent creature could easily prevent him from reaching the remedy, and after coming so far, the thought of failure was almost unbearable. But then he remembered his sleeping family, and his fear transformed into something stronger, honest, desperate love. "My family is trapped in an endless sleep," Dozy said, his voice small but steady. "My entire colony lies frozen in the deep chambers, and I'm the only one awake to help them. I've traveled through the white desert and climbed the mountain of echoes, not because I'm brave or strong, but because I love them more than I love my own comfort. If you won't let me take the remedy, then I'll stay here and try to convince you for as long as it takes, because giving up on them is not a choice I can make." Seraphina studied him with those ancient wise eyes. "And what if I told you that taking the ancient remedy would cost you something precious? What if I told you that saving your family would mean you could never return to your old life of comfortable sleep and easy dreams?" Dozy didn't hesitate. "Then that's a price I'll gladly pay. I've learned something on this journey, Guardian Seraphina. I've learned that there are things more important than my own comfort. There are purposes worth any sacrifice. My family gave me love and home and belonging, even when I didn't deserve it. Now it's my turn to give something back." The butterfly was silent for a long moment, her rainbow wings catching the golden light of the spring. Then, slowly, she began to smile. "Little ant," she said softly, "you have already passed the greatest test. The ancient remedy has power only when it is sought by one whose heart is pure, whose love is selfless, and whose courage comes not from fearlessness, but from devotion to others. You have become exactly the kind of creature the remedy was created to help." With a graceful flutter of her magnificent wings, Seraphina stepped aside. "Take the flower, brave Dozy, but know this, when you use its power to wake your family, you will discover that the greatest magic was never in the remedy itself. The greatest magic has been growing in your own heart all along." With the ancient remedy carefully wrapped in soft moss and tucked safely against his chest, Dozy began the long journey back to Busy Hill Colony. But this return trip was nothing like his outward adventure. First, Seraphina had given him a gift, a small vial of water from the golden spring that would protect him from the worst of winter's cold. As long as he carried it, the freezing temperatures that had nearly defeated him before felt merely cool and refreshing. Second, and more importantly, Dozy himself had changed. The little ant who had begun this journey had been weak, untested, and unsure of his own abilities. The ant who now traveled homeward was strong, confident, and filled with purpose. His legs, once used only for walking from his bed to the food stores, now carried him over difficult terrain with steady determination. His mind, once clouded with sleepiness, now stayed sharp and alert, reading the signs of weather and navigation with newfound skill. But perhaps most remarkably, Dozy found that he was no longer traveling alone. Word of his quest had somehow spread throughout the winter landscape, carried by the mysterious networks that connect all living things. Along his path, he began encountering other creatures who had heard his story and wanted to help. A family of field mice, snug in their snow burrow, invited him to share their warmth for a night and sent him on his way with extra supplies. A wise old owl swooping silently through the darkness guided him around a dangerous ice storm that could have trapped him for days. Even the winter wind, once his greatest enemy, seemed to have changed its mind and now pushed gently at his back, helping him move faster toward home. How strange, Dozy mused as he walked, that the world seems so much friendlier now than it did on my journey out. But it wasn't the world that had changed, it was Dozy himself. When you travel with love and courage in your heart, when your purpose is pure and your determination is real, the world responds by offering help in unexpected ways. The lazy little ant had become a hero, and heroes, Dozy was learning, rarely have to face their challenges completely alone. As he crested the final hill and saw the great oak tree in the distance, its branches heavy with snow but still strong and proud, Dozy's heart swelled with an emotion he had never experienced before. It was homecoming, not just the return to a familiar place, but the return of someone who had left as a child and come back as a protector. The entrance to Busy Hill Colony was exactly as he had left it, sealed with snow and ice. But now, instead of seeming like an insurmountable obstacle, it simply looked like a door that needed opening. With his new strength and determination, Dozy dug through the blockage in a fraction of the time it had taken him to leave. Soon he was racing through the familiar tunnels, past the empty chambers and frozen passages, toward the ancient chamber where his family lay sleeping. The scene in the ancient chamber was exactly as Dozy had left it, hundreds of ants lying in peaceful but frightening stillness, covered with their blankets of woven grass, breathing so slowly that they seemed more like beautiful statues than living creatures. But now, instead of feeling helpless and afraid, Dozy felt confident and hopeful. He had the ancient remedy. He had learned how to use it from Guardian Seraphina, and most importantly, he had discovered the power of his own love and determination. Following the butterfly's instructions, Dozy carefully unwrapped the miraculous flower. Even in the dim light of the underground chamber, it glowed with soft rainbow radiance, and its gentle song seemed to fill the air with promise and hope. "Wake up, my family," Dozy whispered, holding the flower high above his head. "Your sleepy little Dozy has brought you the gift of morning." He gently squeezed one perfect petal, and a single drop of nectar fell from the ancient remedy onto the stone floor of the chamber. Immediately, the drop began to glow brighter and brighter, spreading its light in ripples across the floor, up the walls, and over the sleeping forms of every ant in the colony. The effect was more beautiful than any sunrise Dozy had ever seen. As the golden light touched each sleeping ant, they began to stir. First their antennae twitched, then their legs moved slightly, then their eyes fluttered open. One by one, like flowers opening to greet the dawn, the ants of Busy Hill Colony began to wake up. Queen Antonia was the first to sit up, looking around in confusion that quickly changed to amazement as she saw Dozy standing in the center of the chamber holding the glowing flower. "Dozy?" she said, her voice filled with wonder. "My dear little ant, what has happened? How long have we been sleeping? And what is that beautiful light?" Before he could answer, Aunt Busy sat up, then Cousin Scurry, then all the worker ants, nursery attendants, and tunnel diggers. Soon the chamber was filled with the sound of confused but happy chatter as the entire colony woke up and began trying to understand what had happened to them. "We've been under a sleeping spell," Dozy explained, his voice stronger and more confident than anyone had ever heard it before. a deep winter magic that trapped you all in endless dreams. But I traveled to the valley of the Golden Spring and brought back the ancient remedy to wake you up." The silence that followed this announcement was profound. Then Aunt Busy began to laugh, not mockingly, but with joy and amazement. "Our sleepy little Dozy," she said. "Our little aunt who couldn't stay awake for dinner. You traveled alone through winter dangers to save us all?" "But how?" asked Cousin Scurry, his eyes wide with admiration. "You were always so tired, so scared of adventures. How did you become brave enough for such an impossible journey?" Dozy looked around at all the faces he loved, faces that were now awake and safe because of his efforts, and he smiled the biggest smile of his entire life. "I learned something important," he said. "I learned that love is stronger than fear, and that caring about others can make you braver than you ever thought possible. I was never lazy. I was just waiting for something important enough to wake up for." From that day forward, everything changed in Busy Hill Colony, but especially for Dozy. He never again slept through important events or family gatherings. Not because he had stopped loving sleep, he still enjoyed a good nap as much as any ant, but because he had learned to balance rest with responsibility, dreams with action, comfort with courage. Queen Antonia appointed him as the colony's official guardian of winter preparations, in charge of making sure they would never again be caught unprepared for seasonal dangers. Dozy took this job seriously, using his hard-won knowledge of navigation and survival to keep his family safe. But more importantly, Dozy had discovered something about himself that he had never known before. He was a natural storyteller. During the long winter evenings, he would gather the colony around him and tell the tale of his great journey. The White Desert, the Mountain of Echoes, the Valley of the Golden Spring, and Guardian Seraphina. His stories were so vivid and exciting that even the youngest ants would sit perfectly still, hanging on every word. And at the end of each telling, when the little ones asked if the story was really true, Dozy would smile and show them the small vial of water from the Golden Spring that he still carried, water that glowed softly in the darkness and reminded everyone that impossible dreams can come true when they're powered by love. The ancient remedy flower was planted in a place of honor in the colony's main garden, where it continued to bloom year-round, its rainbow petals serving as a reminder that the greatest magic doesn't come from special flowers or mystical springs. It comes from the courage to love others more than you love your own comfort. Years later, when new generations of ants heard the story of Dozy's great journey, some would say it was just a fairy tale, too magical to be real. But the older ants, the ones who remembered the great sleep and the miraculous awakening, would shake their heads and smile. "It's all true," they would say, "every word." And the most important truth of all is this: inside every sleepy dreamer is a hero waiting for the right moment to wake up. And Dozy, now grown old and wise but still enjoying his afternoon naps, would nod and add, "The right moment always comes when someone you love needs you to be brave. Love is the greatest alarm. Clock in the world, it never fails to wake us up when it's time to do something important." As for the ants of Busy Hill Colony, they learned that while it's good to work hard and prepare carefully for life's challenges, it's equally important to have dreamers among them. Dreamers who might seem lazy or different, but who carry within their hearts the power to save everyone when the impossible becomes necessary. And they all lived happily, safely, and wakefully ever after. The end.